Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, The Top 3 Ways Spreadsheets Kill Your Modeling Mojo. My name is Jessica Liao, and I'll be the presenter for our webinar today. Before we get started, let's just talk a little bit about the agenda of the webinar and really what to expect. So firstly, we're going to talk about the top 3 ways spreadsheets kill your modeling mojo on a general basis. We're going to kind of see 3 pitfalls of working in Excel. And then we're actually going to see how those pertain to modeling assets in Excel. So we'll still talk about those pitfalls, but we're actually going to open up an Excel sheet where we have an asset modeled in there. And we are going to really see how those 3 ways affect us when we're modeling the assets, some specific examples within that Excel sheet. And then from the Excel sheet, we're really going to transition into ARGUS Enterprise. And we're going to see how to avoid those pitfalls by using Excel and a real estate-specific software solution combined. So if we pair those things, if we pair Excel and a software solution, which in this case is going to be ARGUS Enterprise, how can we avoid these pitfalls? So that is what our agenda is going to be today. We're once again going to talk about it on a general basis, then we're going to get into Excel, then we're going to see how to solve it in ARGUS Enterprise. So let's go ahead, let's get started. We have a short, really introduction PowerPoint that introduces us to these 3 pitfalls. So let's go ahead and let's get started in that PowerPoint. The very first pitfall is actually going to be that inherent errors go unresolved. That is the first pitfall when working in Excel, because every spreadsheet at some point was created by someone. But many companies, and really all companies, we inherit spreadsheets that were created by somebody that may not be there anymore, or they were created by multiple people, and created by copying and pasting formulas and making changes. So we have these really complex templates that we're just going in and inputting in data from. And so what's really great about that is that Excel is so complex, and that is fantastic because it is so complex. But in reality, the quality of your outputs is affected in over 90% of these spreadsheets. So that can be a pretty big deal. And not to mention that, yes, we can inherit these errors, but we also can create them ourselves. So we can have typos. Even if you are the creator of a spreadsheet, you can have errors and have typos and, fat finger something. That's very, very common. And some of these errors won't even be seen in Excel because there is not a lot of data checking. So even the most conservative research-based estimate indicates that 1 in every 100 spreadsheet cells does contain an error. And so even though we know, of course, if this is our own spreadsheet, the problems that can cause, because of course, we can overestimate expenses, underestimate revenue, or vice versa. This is even a bigger problem if we're working with client files, because we can have a damaged reputation, fines, or litigation expenses. So that becomes even a bigger problem if we are working with the client file. So that's one of our very first pitfalls when it comes to working with Excel. The second one is lack of governance around spreadsheets. So we briefly mentioned this before, but there's not a lot of system checkers in place when it comes to Excel. So when it comes to quality assurance of these spreadsheets, really who is auditing these spreadsheets when we get them? Many times it is the author themselves, or if we're just going in and we're making these changes to these files, then we go back and it's up to us to try to check these formulas. It's up to us to check all of these, the dates of these, for instance, if we're talking about asset modeling, the dates and the inputs and the formulas that we're using for all of these different pieces of data. It's up to us to do that. And really, quality assurance should be more than just you as the author checking for errors and checking the quality assurance. And really so much time is spent on that for there to still end up being errors in the spreadsheet. So that's really going to be one of the second pitfall. One of the pitfalls, our second one. And then our third pitfall is limited data management when it comes to spreadsheets. So spreadsheets are cell level focused. And we're actually going to see once we get into our Excel sheet how one cell can have so many formulas that's going to be tied to all of these different sheets. And that's all, so it's quite a bit of data all in one cell coming from multiple sheets, and having these really complex formulas in it. And so we're going to talk just a little bit about that, and we're going to see how much complexity is in one asset. And so when it comes to data management of spreadsheets, what happens when we want to have multiple assets in our spreadsheets and consolidate and compare? That is really where Excel can be very limited. So we are going to talk about that once we're in our Excel sheet, and we're going to talk about how AE can help solve that. So those are our top 3 pitfalls of modeling in Excel. So inherent errors, lack of governance around spreadsheets, and limited data management when it comes to spreadsheets. So now that we've talked about these on a bit of a general basis, let's talk about them actually in an Excel model. So let's talk about them in Excel, and let's see really all 3 of these pitfalls in one asset in Excel. So let's go ahead and let's start just by taking a look at this sheet. Okay, so I have just a typical asset that's modeled here, and we have quite a bit of different information for this asset. So it starts off the valuation tab of this asset, and you're going to see that it has some different data. And many people model investment evaluation data in Excel. But what I want everybody to just kind of keep in mind is that we have some information here: terminal cap rate, selling cost. We have the a cash flow for every year, okay? And this valuation tab is bringing in cash flow information from a pro forma tab. And if I head on over into this pro forma tab is bringing in information from individual tenant tabs. And if I move over into an individual tenant tab, the individual tenant tab is bringing in information from the rent roll tab. So all of these different sheets are really connected, and we have, for instance, if I go back to the pro forma and I just click on one cell, we have so much data just in one particular cell. So for one, there's so much room for error in this one Excel sheet. Okay. 2, to audit this. So when it comes to auditing this Excel sheet, or if we just receive this as a template and we want to know, when we calculated the resale, which year did we calculate off of? Was it our last year? Was it 12 months after we sell? Where is that coming from? We have to go and we have to figure out what NOI year they're using. So we have to figure out this information. When it comes to calculating our cap rate, we have to go in here and see what year's NOI did we use just to calculate our direct cap value when we're using that direct cap rate formula. So when it comes to trying to figure out what formulas we're using in this, even if it's just for the pro forma, did we use the correct cell from every single one of the individual tenant reports? Did we do that just to calculate our total pro forma? And when it came to calculating the individual tenant cash flows, did we use the correct pieces of information from our rent roll? So it's quite a bit of room for errors. And another thing that I wanted to just mention right here is that all of this information is just for one particular asset. So when it comes to consolidating multiple assets, comparing assets, things like that, consolidation reports can even be more tedious just to make sure that that is correct. So those are just some of just the top examples when it comes to those three pitfalls in Excel. And one other thing that I just wanted to mention is I very recently trained a group of asset managers. And in the training, one of the asset managers said that he's working on a huge retail property and there is leakage in the tenant reimbursement. There is leakage and he's trying to figure out what tenant it's coming from. And so he was going and calculating, he was going to his operating expenses and calculating how much each tenant was reimbursing for each individual expense and the amount of work it required. It wasn't necessarily hard. It was just that the amount of work that it required was so time consuming. And it took forever just to calculate what each tenant was reimbursing for every single one of the expenses, just to figure out where the leakage was coming from. And so it's those examples that we need to kind of think about when we're actually going to head into ARGUS Enterprise. Just those examples of little things that aren't necessarily hard in Excel, but they are complex and they're time consuming. And really we're going to see how a real estate specific software solution is going to solve those pitfalls. Okay, we're going to talk about that. And in this case, it is going to be ARGUS Enterprise. So how can we have AE work? And it's not necessarily in place of Excel. It's going to be working with Excel and pairing them together to really save you the most time and to reduce those pitfalls. Okay, so we've talked about these three pitfalls on a general basis. We've talked about them actually looking at an asset in Excel. We've seen that just in this asset in Excel, there's formulas for the valuation that are stemmed from, once again, the pro forma. The pro forma has information from individual tenant cash flows as well as operating expense data. Okay, the individual tenant cash flows has data coming from a rent roll that we have in Excel. So all of this information is all tied together. We saw those pitfalls. Let's head into ARGUS Enterprise and let's talk about how it can solve some of these problems for us, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to head right on into ARGUS Enterprise, okay? Going to head right into AE. And as soon as I get into ARGUS Enterprise, I'm going to actually get into Ivy Tower. So that is the exact same asset. And you can see that I have Ivy Tower pro forma in Excel. That's the exact same asset, only this time it's modeled in ARGUS Enterprise. So I already have it in here and I have it brought up in AE. And we're just going to go right on back to that very first error. Okay, and our very first error was that, or our very first pitfall, I should say, was that there are inherent errors that go unresolved in Excel. And so the way, and this is just going to be the number one, it's going to be one of the number one solution really for all three of these pitfalls. The way that AE helps us with this is that formulas are embedded into ARGUS Enterprise. So you're going to see here that I have my rent roll modeled out in ARGUS Enterprise. I have my operating expenses. I have all of the data from the Ivy Tower Excel sheet. I have it in ARGUS Enterprise. And what's great is that when it comes to getting my pro forma, okay, when it comes to getting individual tenant reports, this is not us going in and inputting in formulas to get these outputs. The formulas are already embedded into ARGUS Enterprise. So I am only inputting in our input data, and everything else is done for me. So if I hit my F3 button to head right on into my report, I have a cash flow that is here for me right now. Okay, and I can see my potential base rent coming in across the property. I can see recoveries, I can see expenses, I can see all of this information. I can run individual tenant reports as well. There we go. Let me just show you this. I can run individual tenant reports to see those individual tenant level cash flows. And I can take a look at that and make sure it's all working correctly. So that is the number one thing in ARGUS Enterprise that's going to save time and reduce errors. The formulas are embedded. So we are only inputting in the input data. Now, the next thing that I really want to talk about is our lack of governance when it comes to Excel. So we've talked a little bit about that. You know, who's auditing these Excel sheets? Many times it's us ourselves. You know, we're going in, inputting in the data. We're going in, or we're even creating these Excel sheets, and we're auditing it ourselves to make sure the formulas are correct. But there's not a lot of system checkers. And so what's great about AE is that when I input in all of the same data that is in Excel, if you take a look, anything that really stands out or anything that is an error. So for instance, if our tenant expires before our analysis even starts, we're going to get an error, okay? If our date available is after our lease start, you know, something like that, the date that the space is available. If it starts or if it is available, okay, and you can kind of take a look if I hover over it. If the date available is after the tenant's lease start date, well, we're going to get an error message that just lets us know it looks like there's a typo here. It doesn't look like this is the correct piece of data. And that's really what we need. We need system checkers because this is all the same information that was in our Excel sheet. However, our Excel sheet didn't tell us that there was any errors in there. Now, I'm going to also hit F3 to head right back into my reports. I'm going to run a report in AE, just so we could take a look at some other pieces of information, because though there can be input errors, of course, that AE will catch, there's also audit reports to where you can audit the data and try to catch any other input errors that you may have. For instance, if you had an error when it came to base rent or free rent or things like that, there's a lot of things that ARGUS Enterprise can do to fix that. So if I hit F3 and I head right back on over into my report, one thing that I wanted to let you know is that, for instance, if I take a look at my property level cash flow and I think, okay, well, my potential base rent is a little low in year one. It's supposed to be a little bit higher. Maybe there's a typo. Well, I can click on the potential base rent hyperlink. So just so you know, on the left-hand side, anything in light gray is usually a hyperlink. I can click on that, and it will take me right into a lease audit, and I can see the potential base rent for every single tenant in my rent roll. And I could say, yes, it looks like, you know, Shoe Circus, this rent, it looks a little low. It's supposed to be a little bit higher. And I could click on that, and it's going to take me directly to the input down below. So you have quite a few hyperlinks that can help you when it comes to auditing these properties. So I wanted you to know that when it comes to system checkers, there's a few things that can help you out. Now, another thing is we actually have review reports. So I can go to my review reports in ARGUS Enterprise, and it's my last tab on my reporting screen, and I can click on data review details, and I can see any warning or error message when it comes to my data input as well. So all of those error messages that we saw on our rent roll, they will also show up right here in our data review details. That way, if there are any errors when it comes to revenues, expenses, your tenant rent roll, anything in Argus Enterprise that will pop up right here. So, and it lets us know, okay, this is going to be in our lease, which is our rent roll, and that's where we can go and we can check on these errors and these warning messages. And so the story that I kind of mentioned earlier, that I was working with a group of analysts very recently, and they said that there was leakage, okay, from our tenant reimbursements versus what we were paying for our operating expenses, and they wanted to know where it was coming from. Well, in Argus Enterprise, firstly, you have an expense recovery report that's going to show you how much we're paying or how much is recoverable for our expenses, the dollar amount we're getting back, as well as the percentage we're getting back. So that information is going to be in AE. But more importantly, I can go to my property level cash flow. It shows me the dollar amount we are getting back for every single one of our recoverable expenses. But I also have the ability to say, show tenant rows, and then directly on my cash flow, I can see the total dollar amount we're getting back for landscaping, but I can also see how much each tenant is contributing to that. And this report alone can save somebody a significant amount of time, such as the analysts that I was working with. They had 70 tenants in that particular property. And so this is going to save quite a bit of time just to be able to go in here and see how much each one of those tenants is contributing to each one of those recoveries, each one of those expenses. So I just wanted to really discuss that. When it comes to lack of governance in Excel, AE can really go in and save you quite a bit of time. You can audit all of the information that you input in there and run reports over it and save time and really reduce those errors. So the very next thing that I want to talk a little bit about is we've talked about the first two pitfalls, that there's errors and there's a lack of governance when it comes to Excel. And we've talked about how AE can solve those by having the formulas embedded and having many different audit reports. One of the very last things that I really want to mention before we move on to that third pitfall is that also when it comes to different calculations, so I've already talked a little bit about how the formulas and the calculations are embedded in Argus Enterprise. When it comes to these calculations, if you want to know how something is calculating, we also have our F1 menu that we can go to and we can take a look at how certain things are calculated. So I could just take a look at a particular matrix and it will show you different pieces of information. For instance, our gross sale price, this is the NOI divided by the cap rate. So you can take a look at a few different reports and it will actually tell you where the data is coming from and how it is calculated. So it keeps everything standard, okay, in Argus Enterprise. These aren't formulas that somebody's just going to go and type in. These are standard formulas that are used across the board. So I just wanted to mention that as well when it comes to data governance and when it comes to inherent errors. Now, the last pitfall that we talked about was data management. Okay, we talked about it on a general basis using that PowerPoint, that there's very limited data management when it comes to Excel. We also saw the overwhelming amount of data that can come with one asset built in Excel. Now we're going to talk just a little bit about AE and how the data management in Argus Enterprise can really help us out. So we've talked about Ivy Tower, just that one particular asset. Well, in Argus Enterprise, we can have a portfolio with really as many assets as we need in that portfolio. So for instance, you can see that I have 5 assets in this particular portfolio. Okay, and these 5 assets that are here right now, if I want to do an analysis over these 5 assets, I can easily do that in ARGUS Enterprise. If I want to do a lease review over these 5 assets and audit all of the different leases within all of these different assets, I can absolutely do that. If I want to do a consolidation of all of these assets and run a consolidated cash flow, or if I want to do a comparison, I can do that as well. So when it comes to that data management, this in Excel would be a huge amount of time and effort to run an analysis over this, to run a consolidation over 5 assets. To do all of this in Excel it leaves a huge amount of room for errors, and it's going to be very, very time consuming. Where in ARGUS Enterprise, it's really just the press of a button. And so I can go and I can click on my analysis tab. And once again, this is just an overview of it. We're in our portfolio level interface, and I'm just going to run an analysis over all 5 of those properties within this portfolio. And when I take a look at the analysis, it's going to allow me to compare. So you can see that I get to go in and I can have charts, I can have pivot grids, and I really get to pick the KPIs I want displayed on this screen. So I can do comparisons over this portfolio. I can take a look at different KPIs within each one of these properties in the portfolio. I can do all this with really just the click of a button, clicking that analysis tab and running that. I can also run portfolio level reports as well, such as a consolidated cash flow. So if you take a look, I already have one up. Just so everyone knows where they're found, when you go to the reports, they're in the upper left-hand corner, and you'll see all of your portfolio level reports that you can run across every single property in that portfolio. So I have a consolidated cash flow right here that tells me what the consolidated cash flow is every single year. And if I click the plus signs to the left, it shows me how much each individual property is contributing to that total every single year. So that is just with a simple report, just loading that report, choosing to run it over all of my properties and hitting run, I can run a consolidated cash flow. It's not me adding together each individual tenant's cash flow, or excuse me, each individual asset's pro forma. It's not me adding that together. ARGUS is doing that for me, so it's saving us quite a bit of time. I also have the ability to run a cash flow comparison as well. So I can go in and I can just click 2 different properties here. So I can compare this particular asset right back to Ivy Tower. So if I just choose Ivy Tower, which is the asset we're working with in Excel, I can run, oh, there we go. So I can actually run this report and do a quick comparison of these 2 assets and see the variance every single year of their cash flows. It's not me going in and doing a comparison in Excel and trying to make sure that there are no errors. This is just me selecting the properties I want to compare, running it, and it's showing me that comparison. So once again, saves me quite a bit of time. So when it comes to data management in ARGUS Enterprise, it's significantly easier than trying to manage that overwhelming amount of data that can be sent to you in Excel. Okay? So we've talked a little bit about the 3 pitfalls in using Excel, and we've talked about how AE can solve them. So the last thing that I really want to mention is that you don't ever really necessarily have to choose one over the other. We really want to see here how they work together. So how does ARGUS Enterprise and Excel work together? Because once again, you're not trying to use one over the other. Really using them together is the most beneficial thing that you can do because of the flexibility Excel has. That you can have AE do some of the hardest work for you. So with that being said, let me get back into my property, okay? Let me go ahead and get right back into this property. And I just wanted to mention a few things. So when it comes to Excel, there's a lot of times where, yes, you know, the templates that are sent to you can be fantastic, not necessarily creating a whole pro forma. In Excel, that may not be, but there's other things that could be really, really beneficial. For instance, if you have, you know, debt, for instance, modeled in Excel, that can be very, very important. And it's some investment information and valuation information. Having that aspect in Excel can be very, very beneficial. But when it comes to getting a pro forma, it doesn't have to be you adding everything together. What's really beneficial about that is that in ARGUS Enterprise, you can go in, run a property level cash flow, hit export, and export this right on out to Excel and take that and use that in your Excel template. Okay, so once again, it's not necessarily you using one over the other. Using them, you know, pairing them together can really be the most beneficial here. And so once again, just so everybody can see that, once I have a cash flow in ARGUS Enterprise, I can export my cash flow right on out to Excel, or really any report that I need. I can export tenant level reports out to Excel. Any of my audit reports I can export out to Excel, and so on. So I have the ability to go in here and take whatever, you know, output data that I want, get that out to Excel and use it in any of the templates that I need. On the opposite end of that spectrum, many of us, even if we're using ARGUS Enterprise, we still have quite a bit of data sent to us in Excel. And when it comes to getting this data from Excel into ARGUS Enterprise, it doesn't have to be us just manually typing it. Okay, AE and Excel work really well together. So I can come in to a property, okay, or I can, for instance, let's say that this asset was just sent to us. Okay, Ivy Tower was just sent to us, and I wanted to model it in ARGUS Enterprise. A lot of the information, so I'm just going to create a quick property real quick. A lot of that information can just be copied and pasted in. So when it comes to, for instance, expenses, I can add in quite a few blank rows. Okay, once I add those rows in, I can go to my operating expense data. I can highlight it, can do Control C, go right on into ARGUS Enterprise, Control V, I can paste it in. I can go over to the amount and paste in the amount. I have the ability to do that, just copying and pasting, which can save us, once again, quite a bit of time. So when it comes to the spreadsheets and them killing your modeling mojo, you can have ARGUS Enterprise do some of the hardest work for you. And after it is in AE, and just one other thing that I wanted to show you is you can also do this in your rent roll as well. So I can add in blank lines, go right into AE, highlight those tenants, or excuse me, go right into Excel, highlight those tenants, head right back into AE, and paste them in. And so you can have ARGUS Enterprise do the majority of the work for you. Input in the data that you need, have it calculate all of these different outputs for you. And then once you have that, if you need to head back into Excel, it's very easily done, as we just saw. Just export that out. So those are the top 3 ways spreadsheets are killing your modeling mojo. And those are the top ways that AE solves all that. So thank you so much for attending, everyone.